The global wine market moves $350 billion a year. Yellowtail, Barefoot, Beringer, Apothic, Sutterholm, Franzia, names on shelves from Buenos Aires to Berlin to Warsaw, brands that built their entire business on the idea that you would never read what they are not required to tell you. By the end of this, you will know exactly what is in those bottles and which 6 brands are actually worth buying. Lab results, settlement figures, not opinion, the paper trail. A brand that bottled over 1 billion bottles before 2013 sold a wine with 19.4 grams of residual sugar per liter, then marketed it as a dry red, Yellowtail. Yellowtail launched in 2001 with 25,000 cases planned for the US market. They sold 1 million in the first year. By 2013, 1 billion bottles total. The brand is now the #1 Australian wine in the world by volume, selling in over 80 countries, 36,000 bottles per hour at their facility in Yenda, New South Wales. Here's what built that volume. Yellowtail Reds were engineered around a single decision: add mega purple and residual sugar to make the wine taste fruity and approachable to mass market consumers. Mega Purple is a concentrated grape juice additive produced from the Ruby Red variety. 68% sugar by content confirmed by Constellation Brands Vice President of Research and Development in 2007, who stated at the time that 20% of annual Mega Purple production goes directly into the wine industry. It deepens color, masks defects from bulk harvesting, and creates a sweetness that registers as richness without appearing on any label. Independent analysis of Yellowtail Red blends found residual sugar levels of approximately 19.4 grams per liter. A dry wine contains under 4 grams. A wine at 19 is not dry. It is what the industry calls off-dry, sold everywhere as though the distinction does not exist. The label on every bottle says only contains sulfites, not Mega Purple, not 68% sugar concentrate, not the residual sugar level. There is no law that requires them to say any of it. The brand that built this model is now your template for every name that follows. But Yellowtail only got there because the regulatory structure made it possible. The brand that took that structure furthest is the one with $555 million in US sales last year alone, Barefoot. Barefoot Wines, owned by E. and J. Gallo since 2005, is the #1 selling table wine brand in the United States, and among the top 10 most valuable wine brands worldwide. Gallo controls over 30% of the American wine market. Their entire model is volume at the lowest possible cost. And the only way to achieve that at Barefoot's scale is to use every approved additive the FDA permits without telling you a single one. There are 76 winemaking additives currently approved by the FDA for use in U.S. wine production. Wine is taxed as alcohol, not food. That classification means it is exempt from the ingredient labeling requirements that apply to every other consumable you buy. The cereal, the bread, the cooking oil, the juice, every one of those must list ingredients. Your bottle of Barefoot is required to tell you only one thing: contains sulfites. The other 75 possible additives, Mega Purple, dimethyl dicarbonate, isinglass from fish bladders, potassium sorbate, ammonium phosphate, none of them required, not a single one. And then there is the glyphosate. In 2019, U.S. PIRG Education Fund commissioned independent laboratory testing of 20 popular wines and beers. Barefoot Cabernet Sauvignon tested at 36.3 parts per billion of glyphosate, the active ingredient in Roundup, confirmed by the lab and reported by CBS News, EcoWatch, and the Washington Post. Glyphosate is classified as a probable human carcinogen by the WHO's International Agency for Research on Cancer. The EPA sets no limit for glyphosate in wine. There is no standard to violate. There's also no label to tell you it is there. Gallo named their brand after bare feet in a vineyard. They did not mention what was in the soil. The EPA has set no legal limit for glyphosate in wine, which means there is no threshold to violate, which means the label stays clean, which means you keep buying, which is the only outcome any of these parties need. If this is the first time you are hearing the words probable carcinogen and barefoot in the same sentence, subscribe and drop your country in the comments. This script draws on published US PIRG laboratory data and FDA regulatory filings. Now back to the list. A brand with roots going back to 1876 sold wine with arsenic levels confirmed by 3 independent labs at up to 5 times the limit the EPA allows in drinking water. Beringer. Beringer Vineyards, owned by Treasury Wine Estates, the Australian conglomerate with operations across 20 countries, is one of the most historically trusted names in Napa Valley winemaking. It is also one of 28 wineries named in a California class. Action filed in 2015 after independent lab beverage grades tested 1,306 types of wine. Of those, 83 showed arsenic levels the lab CEO Kevin Hicks described publicly as beyond belief 3 separate testing laboratories confirmed the results before the filing. Beringer's specific wines named White Merlot 2011, White Zinfandel 2011, Red Moscato, and Sweet Moscato. Arsenic is a known human carcinogen. California's threshold, the level at which state law requires disclosure, is 10 parts per billion, the same standard the EPA uses for drinking water. The industry's response: dispute the findings, cite the federal government's absence of a wine-specific arsenic limit, and continue selling. The FDA has no mandated arsenic limit for wine because wine is not regulated as food. The bottles stayed on shelves. No recall, no reformulation announcement, no label change. Treasury Wine Estates issued a statement saying their brands were fully compliant with all relevant federal and state guidelines. They were. That is the problem, and they knew it. The case against Beringer exposes the mechanism behind every mass-market wine story on this list. When there is no legal limit, there is no violation, and when there is no required disclosure, there is no evidence the consumer ever needed to know. A wine sold as a bold, dry red blend across more than 40 countries contains 16.4 grams of residual sugar per liter, more than triple the 4 grams per liter that defines a dry wine. Apothic. Apothic Red is an E and J Gallo brand launched in 2010. It became one of the fastest growing red wines in the United States and expanded to the United Kingdom, Australia, Canada, and continental Europe. The wine is marketed with vocabulary like dark and mysterious and bold red blend. On the back label, contains sulfites. 16.4 grams of residual sugar per liter is not a rumor. It was independently confirmed by laboratory analysis and reported by James Beard. Award-winning wine writer Jamie Good then reproduced and cited in publications from Wine Folly to multiple consumer databases. 16.4 grams per liter is what the industry classifies as off-dry. It is the equivalent of adding approximately 1.5 teaspoons of sugar to every standard glass. The label does not say off-dry. The marketing does not say sweet. The word dry never appears explicitly because it does not have to. The category name Red Blend carries the implication of dryness that Gallo relies on the consumer to assume. Apothic Red became the template for an entire generation of mass-market wines deliberately sweetened to broaden appeal while remaining legally describable as table wine. The British Columbia Liquor Distribution Board rated Apothic Red as 0 on their internal sweetness scale, defined as under 5 grams per liter. The actual content was 16.4. When consumers discovered the discrepancy, the BCLDB acknowledged the error. No recall, no reformulation. The wine is still selling. There are brands that failed the arsenic standard, the glyphosate standard, and the sugar standard simultaneously. One of them hit 51 parts per billion of glyphosate, the highest level of any of the 20 wines tested. Sutter Home. Sutter Home, owned by Trinchero Family Estates, sold over 10 million cases in 2021 alone. It is the second best-selling table wine in the United States and distributed across multiple markets globally. In the U.S. PERG 2019 glyphosate study, Sutter Home Merlot registered 51.4 parts per billion of glyphosate, the highest reading of all 20 beverages tested, confirmed by independent laboratory analysis, reported by CBS News and Food Dive. Beringer came in at 42.6, Barefoot at 36.3. In the 2015 arsenic class action, Sutter Home wines appeared in testing. With arsenic levels the lawsuit alleged could reach up to 500% above safe daily consumption limits, with more than 10 of Sutter Home's wines named. Trinchero Family Estates disputed all claims. No products were recalled. The USDA does not regularly test wine for glyphosate. The EPA sets no limit for glyphosate in wine. There is no mechanism that would require disclosure. There is no mechanism that would stop it. In 2021, Trinchero sold over 10 million cases under the Sutter Home label alone. That is not a niche product. That is a supply chain built on the assumption that you will never run the test yourself. Sutter Home invented White Zinfandel in the 1970s and built its brand on accessibility and family values. By the time independent labs got inside the bottles, the family had sold 10 million cases. Not this year. Every year. A boxed wine brand that captured 60% of the U.S. boxed wine category had a specific variety tested at 5 times the EPA's arsenic standard for drinking water, confirmed by 3 independent labs before litigation. Franzia. Franzia is owned by the Wine Group, the 3rd largest wine company in the United States by volume. The brand's White Grenache, one of its most popular blush varieties, was identified by Beverage Grade's lab analysis as one of the highest arsenic readings in the entire sample of 1,306 wines. 5 times the EPA drinking water limit, confirmed by 3 separate laboratories. Franzia is sold in supermarkets from Sao Paulo to Lagos to Warsaw, a 3-liter box at $2.17 per 750 milliliter equivalent. The volume the brand moves makes it one of the largest single sources of wine consumed by price-sensitive consumers anywhere on Earth. Those consumers are not seeing a label that says anything about arsenic. They are seeing a kangaroo and a mountain and a promise of value. The wine group's response to the 2015 lawsuit was the same as everyone else's. No federal limit, no violation. Legal, yes. But the math was real. The labs were real. The 5 times was real. A wine named after something you eat for dessert contained 12 grams of residual sugar per liter. Sold without sweetness disclosure in supermarkets across 4 continents. Cupcake. Cupcake Vineyards, also owned by the wine group, markets itself as a fun, approachable wine for everyday occasions. The Red Velvet Red blend contains 12 grams of residual sugar per liter, confirmed by independent tasting analysis, more than 3 times the 4 grams per liter that defines a dry wine. The name Cupcake is doing the labeling work the law does not require. The brand is telling you exactly what it is. The irony is that U.S. wine labeling law requires so little that naming a wine after a pastry still does not legally constitute a sweetness claim. No disclosure required. Sold in more than 20 countries. Here is the architecture behind everything you just heard. Wine is the only consumable you regularly buy where the manufacturer is legally permitted to add up to 76 different substances and required to list exactly 1. Not 75, not 10. 1. Sulfates. That is the entire disclosure. In supermarkets from New York to Sao Paulo to Berlin to Warsaw, you're handing money to an industry that decided 60 years ago that their product should not be held to the same labeling standard as breakfast cereal. The reason that decision has never been reversed is that the companies making it are the same companies that spend more than $2 billion a year on wine lobbying and marketing globally. Now here is what the receipts look like from the other direction. 6 brands that have chosen to operate as if you deserve to know what is in the bottle. Bonterra Organic Estates, California's #1 certified organic winery and the largest regenerative organic certified winery in the United States, exports to over 50 countries. It is owned by Viña Concha y Toro and certified by California Certified Organic Farmers. Every Bonterra wine is made from 100% organically farmed grapes, with no synthetic pesticides, no herbicides, and no mega purple. The certification means third-party auditors inspect both the vineyard and the winery. They received the Wine Enthusiast 93-point score and ranked in the top 100 wines for 2024, at $12 to $18 a bottle in most markets. That is the price of a bottle of Barefoot plus transparency. Domaine Bousquet is Argentina's leading organic wine exporter and the first winery in the Southern Hemisphere to receive regenerative organic certification. The brand produces 4 million liters a year from vineyards in the Uco Valley at 1,200 meters elevation, altitude that eliminates the fungal pressure that pushes conventional winemakers toward pesticide application in the first place. Domaine Bousquet operates its own import companies in the United States, Europe, and Brazil. It exports to more than 50 countries. No synthetic agrochemicals, no mega purple, no undisclosed sugar. The Gaia Organic Malbec scored 92 points at Wine Anorak and retails, for under $20 in its primary markets. Frey Vineyards in California's Mendocino County was the first biodynamic winery in the United States to receive Demeter certification, which it achieved in 1996. Biodynamic certification goes beyond organic. It requires the vineyard to function as a self-sustaining ecosystem, with no added sulfites, no synthetic inputs of any kind, and third-party auditing against the Demeter standard. When Mamavation commissioned independent lab testing for glyphosate residues in 2023, Frey came back with no detectable toxins, not trace amounts, 0. That is the result that the U.S. PIRG study found in exactly 1 out of 20 beverages, the one organic brand that refused to allow conventional contamination sources anywhere in its supply chain. Frey bottles retail between $12 and $19. Miguel Torres in Spain has been farming organically since 1984, longer than most of the brands on the attack list have existed. Torres owns vineyards in Spain, Chile, and California, all certified organic, and distributes to more than 150 countries. Their organic certification is verified under European Union organic regulation, which is stricter than the FDA framework. It limits sulfite additions to 100 milligrams per liter for red wines and requires full traceability of all vineyard inputs. In markets where EU standards apply, Torres must meet a threshold. In markets where they do not, Torres still meets it. Viña Santa Rita in Chile produces the 120 range, distributed to more than 60 countries, including substantial market presence in the United States, Brazil, Germany, and Poland. The brand is certified sustainable under the Wines of Chile Sustainability Code, which includes third-party verification of pesticide use, water management, and carbon footprint. Santa Rita was named Best Chilean Winery at multiple international competitions. The Cabernet Sauvignon, 120 retails at $9 to $12 globally, within $1 of Barefoot, with a certification and a published audit. Concha y Toro, founded in 1883 and currently exporting to 140 countries, received carbon neutral certification and holds Wines of Chile sustainability certification verified by third-party auditors. Their winemaker, Don Melchor, 2021, was named #1 wine in the world by Wine Spectator's Top 100, the first Chilean wine to hold that position. Concha y Toro is the most globally distributed wine brand in this list. They operate on 6 continents. Every bottle they sell carries a published audit, not an internal policy, an audit. Here's the late reveal. In the United States, when a conventional winemaker wants to add something not already on the 76-item FDA approved list, they can apply under federal regulation 27 CFR section 24.250, a provision known as good commercial practice, and add the substance without ever disclosing it to consumers, not to the EPA, not to the FDA, directly into the bottle. No announcement, no label change, no legal requirement to ever tell you it happened. Every brand on the attack list has operated within the law. The law was designed by people who sell the wine.